So, hello, and I guess you're wondering what that title is, if you've never heard of the character of Tingle, or if you just don't know what that means, then it may be a bit odd. So, let me explain in this video, and we will get down to the bottom of this phenomenon that happens in the gaming industry, although it is not unique to games, to be fair, and has other names in other places. But welcome to the video, everyone. Thank you so much for clicking on my thumbnail, and we will get into this. So, Tingle is a character from The Legend of Zelda, and this is a trope within the gaming world that something, such as Tingle, can be extremely popular in its home region and where it was made, but for some reason or another just does not work well in foreign regions or regions other, so say like Japan versus Europe versus America, and something went wrong in that cultural translation. Now, this happens with a lot of different things and is not unique to gaming. It does have other names in other areas. So, for example, it's often called Americans Hate Soccer, or football, as I would say, due to the well-known phenomenon that Americans are just not a fan of football. They prefer American football, or, padded rugby, as I would call it. But yeah, so there are other names for this, and this is mostly caused normally by values dissonance. So, as I say, something that could be seen as cute or endearing in one culture is baffling, stupid, or actually potentially offensive. This can particularly happen when a character is maybe supposed to represent a certain nation or a certain ethnicity, but is sometimes seen as sort of offensively stereotypical. And that's an example, but we will go with the primary example, the namer of this trope, and that is Tingle himself. So we'll start there, and then I'll move on to some other examples, and you'll see that this can actually be applied to not just single characters. So to give you a bit of background, Tingle is a character from the Legend of Zelda games. He first appeared in Majora's Mask, and I will give you a brief description. Obviously, he's on screen right now. Tingle is he's 35 years old, and he is effectively a man-child. He is short, he's chubby, and he's extremely, shall we say, eccentric. He believes he's a fairy, or wants to turn into a fairy. It changes between games, and he travels by attaching a balloon to himself and flying on that. Personally, I find him very annoying, and I'm glad they've given him less and less focus as the games have gone on. Wind Waker was probably the worst, where you had to deal with him, and he was incredibly irritating. But I'm an example of this trope. I do not like the character of Tingle, but Tingle is actually extremely popular in Japan. Popular enough that he's actually spawned his own set of games, such as Freshly Picked Tingle's Rosy Rupee Land, which, I don't know, I've never played it. It's for the DS. It looks rather silly, but that's kind of the point. I immediately look at it and think, it looks a bit silly, because it's based on this character, and he's very odd. So this is the thing. In Japan, he is kind of seen as a symbol of whimsy, and he's somewhat wistful, and he's a rather endearing figure of that. He never let go of his childlike curiosity and love of fairies and the world and magic and whatnot. Unfortunately, in the West, he is kind of seen as a man-child, which is an archetype within literature and fiction that is really not given much sympathy. And he often comes across as kind of annoying and just plain creepy, if I'm honest. But yeah, so there's the idea. That's the idea of what this trope is about. He is the sort of primary example of this, but there are others, and we'll move on to those now. So another example of this would be Tidus, or Tidus. I'm genuinely not sure how that's pronounced. I think it might be Tidus. Who knows? Anyway, Tidus from Final Fantasy X. He's extremely popular in Japan, becoming somewhat of actually a cultural icon, not just representing Final Fantasy X, but the Final Fantasy franchise in its entirety, and also JRPGs in general as well. He's incredibly popular. In the West, whilst he's not hated like Tingle, he's certainly a much more divisive figure, and he was often seen as quite whiny and just kind of annoying, and that he just complained all the time, and he was very immature. But my counterpoint to this would be, and I will be honest, I love Tidus as a character. I love Final Fantasy X. I did do a breakdown of how I rate all the Final Fantasy games I've played in another video that I've done. If you want to go watch that, I'll put a link in the top corner now, and you can find out where I placed Tidus and his Final Fantasy X cohorts. But yeah, I actually, full disclosure, like the character. But I understand why people see him as whiny. I don't think the voice acting by James Arnold Taylor, shout out to my fellow Taylors, really helped.
Hey you! Don't just stand there! All of this is your fault! Getting swallowed by sin, ending up here in Spyro, not being able to go back to Xanac, and everything! I'm telling you, it's all your fault!
It did come across as kind of grating occasionally, although I think he did a really good job, and everyone points to the laughing scene, but that was intentionally bad. And I'll admit it could be over the top sometimes, but the fact that people call him immature, that's kind of the point of the game. The framing device, which honestly probably didn't help this, is that he's effectively a sports star from a first world country, taking a jolly little adventure in a war-torn third world country with much less technology and home comforts that he's used to, so it probably didn't help. But yeah, so Tidus as a character is another example of this. But a third one could be Tracer from Overwatch. Now, this is a personal one for me. I don't actually play Overwatch, but I have watched a lot of the videos. I do kind of get into it on the esports side of things. And she is an extremely popular character. I mean, she's effectively the face of the game. And in Japan particularly, she is unbelievably popular, which is, I mean, this kind of started the whole hero shooter trend in Japan anyway, and that's what makes her so prominent. And I personally get this one because she's loved in Japan and in the States. In Britain, well, myself and I know a few other people, that extremely exaggerated Cockney accent is frankly irritating. And what's even worse is her voice actress is actually English, British. She's in Downton Abbey, I believe. And I know they obviously have told her to do this, and it's just, I find it irritating. Very irritating.
I've wasted less than most. A difficult question, Arisa. I think there are times when you just have to do what's right.
And honestly, she's supposed to be kind of endearing and, frankly, sexy. And that just ruins it for me. Like, she's a lot less endearing and just much more annoying, I think, to a lot of British people because of that exaggerated accent. And because it's somewhat stereotypical. But that's just a small example on that one. We'll move on to the next one now, which is a really unfortunate one in my mind. But here we go. It's Spyro the Dragon, and not just the character, but the games. So obviously Spyro was beloved in both America and Europe. He is iconic and an absolute dominant force of the early PlayStation 1 era and 3D platformers. He is beloved in both regions. In Japan, however, his games were largely disliked and entirely forgotten and forgettable. Now, a problem for this was partly because due to apparently a demo, they changed the camera angle and slowed down Spyro's speed to offset motion sickness, apparently, which unfortunately just made the games worse. So they didn't sell very well in Japan, to the point that after the first two games, the publisher didn't bother to release them at all. And this is a great example of how pervasive this concept can be, that because Spyro was so disliked and forgettable, that it affected the entire publisher of this. Like, if you wanted this in Japan, you had to get a foreign copy. Well, that's pretty severe. But it can get worse. So first now we've had a couple of characters and games that the games are loved. Now we've stepped up to the entire games are disliked. Well, what can be bigger than that? Well, let's take a look, shall we? And it actually is an entire brand. It is the Xbox. And by extension of that, a genre as well. But we'll get to that in a moment. So the Xbox has actually, obviously, been extremely successful worldwide. But in Japan, it's surprisingly lagging behind everyone else. I mean, historically, it's performed abysmally in the Japanese market, all the way from the 360 era, and the original Xbox, in fairness. The 360 did give it a bit of a bump, but the Xbox One had the worst launch of any console, with little to no queues for it outside the stores that were selling it on its release day. It had monthly sales figures with only triple digits. And that is just... well, frankly, it's embarrassing. Microsoft have tried very hard to turn this around, but honestly, they got off on the wrong foot initially with the advertising and marketing of the original Xbox, focusing heavily on first-person shooter games, which is actually the genre I was talking about. FPS games in general have never been particularly successful in Japan until about the mid-2010s, but we'll get into that in a moment. With Microsoft, a lot of people believed it was what they call consumer nationalism, where Japanese people wanted to buy Japanese products, and they already had Nintendo and Sony, to be fair. Other people countered that, foreign companies have been exceptionally successful in Japan, but generally they have to appeal to the Japanese market, which can be quite different from the American market. And they basically just accused Microsoft of not doing their market research, which, frankly, I agree with slightly. But let's move on to the end one, shall we? FPS games. Okay, so first-person shooters have, again, historically been fairly unpopular in Japan. A lot of the times it's because they are actually associated with the Xbox, which is seen as kind of a delivery platform for these games, so there is an association there, but they just haven't been very popular. People say maybe it's because they focus heavily on the American military, or, Halo sort of things, where it's based on the American military, so Japanese gamers can't really attach to that, but I'm not so sure on that one. They have actually become very popular now, since about the mid-2010s, as they started to evolve and add perks. As FPS games got more interesting, they added perks, stat progression systems, more RPG-like elements as well, such as Destiny, became very popular, so they are getting there, but that shows that even an entire genre can be disliked due to this sort of just this cultural dissonance that can happen, which I find very interesting. But yeah, that's my list though of some of what I find the most interesting ways that this phenomena, this Americans hate Tingle trope, has applied to gaming. I thought that was kind of interesting. I hope you have as well. I really hope you've enjoyed this video. I thank you so much for watching it. If you did enjoy it, please do give it a like. I'm still quite a new channel. I don't have many subscribers, but I like making this content, so a like really helps, and a subscribe is even better. We can feed the algorithm god and get me up to the top, get me trending. Let's try that, shall we? This time next week I'll be a millionaire. Oh, well, I'll have 1 million subs anyway. I hope people got that reference. But it doesn't matter if you didn't. Now, if you really did enjoy my stuff and you want to watch more, there will be another video appearing on screen now. That's selected by YouTube that they think you'll like this. It's one of mine. And I would really like it if you did view those. But if you don't, that's fine as well. I don't mind. I just appreciate people watching my videos. But yeah, I make videos weekly. So if you really like, I'll be up next week. But until then, you stay safe and I will see you later. Thank you.